I'd like to welcome everyone that has joined the session right now. Um, Let me quickly put everything in full screen mode for you so you can properly see the slides. My name is Gijsbert Jansen van Doorn. As you probably noticed, I am not native English speaker. I am Dutch, therefore have an unpronounceable name, and I also ask for your forgiveness for anything that might sound a little bit less English and more Dutch. But I'll definitely do my best. I've been with Zerto for over 2 years now. Started as a system engineer and currently responsible for the system engineers in mainland Europe. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how the Zerto RESTful APIs will change your life for the better, of course. Let's start with a simple thing, or maybe it's a simple thing. What's an API? Of course, the first thing I did when I built this presentation was, okay, let's Google it. Now I found a nice explanation of what an API is. I changed it a little bit, but this basically sums up what an API is and what it does in one sentence. So an API is a description of how software components and or products may interact with other software components and or products. Basically, it's a standard of making sure that programs, software components, software products can talk to each other and use each other, and by sending them specific commands that, of course, they will perform certain actions and send their response back. Of course, Zerto as a product has an API as well. And I'm going to show you how our APIs can help you in your day-to-day management of Zerto, but also some other use cases that might be interesting for you as well. Now, why do we need APIs? I think one of the most important things an IT engineer can do is automate stuff. We don't want to do manual labor anymore. Things that we need to do more often, let's say I want to install VRAs on my system, and I've got 1,000 hosts. I don't want to repeat 1,000 times the same step just to perform that. We want to automate that, just as we've done in car factories all over the world. We started out with a lot of people working on cars. Right now, it's all being done by robots, makes it a lot more efficient, and allows other people to work on other more interesting stuff than just installing VRAs. So that's definitely one of the use cases we'll dig into later on, but this is the main reason why we use APIs. It's to automate stuff. Of course, there's other things as well. Maybe I want to integrate into existing system management programs or monitoring systems. And I'll definitely talk a little bit more about that as soon as we dig into more of the details. Now, how do I start? I think this is one of the most important things, and this is my personal way of starting to automate stuff. The first thing we need to do is build a workflow. Building a workflow shows you what you want to achieve and allows you to get all the logical steps you need to take to perform a certain action. And by pre-building that workflow, it allows you to understand better what you need to do, what you need to script, what components of the product you need, and what API calls you might need to use during that step. The second step is download the API reference guides. We've got two of them. One is for Zerto Virtual Replication. The other one is for the Zerto Cloud Manager. I actually use that reference guide during this presentation to show you how I use it actually in real life. And the third step might be to download our API white paper. Our API white paper has a lot of the use cases I actually discussed during this webinar built into that white paper. We've got the code, we've got the examples, we've got how to use it, when to use it. Really useful white paper. Has many people using it already in the field. I've been using it myself for a long time already. It's an absolute great white paper. We're trying to add these to the handouts of the webinar, but you could always download them from MyZerto. They're publicly available. Go to myzerto.com, technical documentation, and there's where you can find all of our technical documentation, of course, also the API reference guides and the API white paper. Now, one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning of the webinar, if you have any questions, I'll try to leave as much time open at the end of the session to respond to questions, please use the question part of the webinar to ask your questions there. I also have a colleague in the background trying to answer the questions that you might have during the session. I'll definitely spend some time answering questions at the end of the session as well. Hopefully, I won't take too long with talking about APIs, and then so we can have more time to actually answer your questions you might have. Okay, we're going to dig right into the API calls we have. So what can I do using the Zerto virtual replication API? Well, there are different APIs per component. We have an API, but the first one I want to discuss is the VRA API. This has been in the product since version 4.0, update 4, if I'm not mistaken, and this allows you to get information about VRAs, list all the VRAs you have in your environment with their IP addresses and settings. It allows you to add a VRA to your environment, edit the VRA. Of course, if you want to change the IP address, it's definitely possible. Delete the VRA if you're in some kind of maintenance window, you need to remove a host, decommission a host, and also upgrade a VRA. And this allows you to upgrade the VRA using the API. Now, if I go into our reference guide, and this is where I will start digging into this one straight away. Let me see if I can get that a little bit bigger so everyone can see it properly. So this is the actual latest white paper we have right now. I'm scrolling through it right now. If we go into the VRA API, as you can see, it's really clearly documented. VRA API, just click on it and it opens up the VRA's API. It will actually show you what syntax it needs, what parameters it needs, and what kind of responses you will get back as soon as you have initiated, let's say, an install of a VRA or an upgrade of a VRA. Now, this shows you all the things that we can do, what kind of method we use. Is it get, post, put, or delete? And the URL we need to use in our API call, in our scripts. What I will show you is a lot of PowerShell examples, but of course you can use any type of Python, C#, whatever you are used to, whatever is being used in your environment, you can use RESTful APIs in. Now, this actually documents everything you need to do and need to know about this. So let's say, including examples. Let's say we are going to list VRAs. So I'm going to list all the information we have about a VRA. And this is the response we'll get back in JSON. Sorry if I'm going a little bit too fast there. It shows me everything I need to know. What is a data store cluster it's on, data store name, what host is it on, what host ID is it on, IP addresses, all the information you need to extract from that will actually be returned in a JSON format or an XML format. If you then take that data, you can actually convert it to like comma-separated values or even import that into any type of system management, CMDB type of solution you have. Now, what we're actually going to do during this specific example is going to look into the use cases of our VRA API. Of course, it's pulling information of an API, but we can also mass deploy VRAs. Let's say I've got a couple of hundred hosts and I want to install a VRA in all of them. It's a completely new environment and I want to start using that API to deploy all the VRAs. We can definitely deploy that. Of course, because we can also upgrade the VRA using the API, we can also do a mass upgrade of the VRA. You can control it yourself. You've installed a new version, you went from an upgrade from 4.5 to 5.0, you can actually mass upgrade all the VRAs. But besides that, you could also build in more intelligence and say, okay, I want to move vMotion all the hosts off that machine first, or all the VMs off that specific host first, and then upgrade the VRA. These are all things you can automate using both the Zerto API and the VMware API as well, the vCenter API. And another one is automatically install a VRA on a new host. You can do this using vRealize Orchestrator or different other types of orchestration tools you might use in your environment. Now, I'm going to specifically look at the mass deploy of VRA. So this is the really basic, of course I needed to make this in a readable format, a really basic workflow of the VRA deployment. What we're actually using is a comma-separated value file that has a list of all the hosts in there. It has the IP address, name of the host, which data store you want to install the VRAs on, IP address for those VRAs. So this is something we can pre-build using all the nice features we have in Excel and just export it as a comma-separated value. Now, if we go through that workflow, first thing we need to do, and that's we need to do that with every single API call or script we make, we need to authenticate to the API. We need to open up a session to say, hey, I'm the administrator and I want to start sending you API calls. So that's the first step we take. Then, because we pre-created that CSV file containing all the information of our ESXi host, we read the host that we need to install Zerto virtual replication appliance on from that CSV file. And then, once it's in memory, we can simply loop through all those hosts and deploy the VRA. We can define timeouts. There's different things we can do in that script. This script, the example of this script, is actually inside the API white paper. You can directly use it. It has the CSV file in there as well. If I look at the CSV file in a little bit more detail, this is exactly what it is. Host name of the ESXi host, data store name, what network do I want it part of, so what's the network that the VRA needs to use, what VRA group should it be deployed in, number of gigabytes of memory of the VRA, default gateway, subnet mask, and of course the IP address. And basically what we do, and yes, there's a lot of text, there's a lot of lines in the example script, but if you take a deep look at the code, and this of course is PowerShell, this is basically the only thing that we do. For every ESXi host we can find in that imported CSV file, we will simply post the VRA install command using our API. It sounds really difficult, APIs and all these kind of things, but if you actually go through all of our examples, it is actually really easy to consume the API and make your life a little bit easier by automatically deploying VRAs. In practice, we actually use this in POCs right now, where we show people how easy it is to deploy VRAs by using a script on about 20 plus hosts. I would actually say if you have 5+, you can already use this because you don't want to repeat all those steps all the time. Of course, there's multiple APIs in there. We also have the VPG Management API. That one is a little bit more complex, so I'll show you in our guide how it's actually documented. Let me quickly scroll all the way up. There we go, using the APIs. And there's a specific section called Managing VPGs. Now, managing VPGs, because there's a lot of settings, it's a complex process also in the back end. It's a little bit different. So with the VPG Management API, the first thing we need to do is create a VPG settings identifier, and then we can change the settings of that VPG that we defined in the VPG settings identifier call and add all those details in there. Now, the way we add or change VPGs is by using JSON or XML. And that XML has a certain format, and in that format we can change or put all our settings. So if you look at the documentation, we actually show you part of that framework that you get in return. And in that framework, we can just change all the settings that we need to change. Let me quickly scroll to a specific part. Okay, there we go. Now, these are the basic settings of that VPG identifier in JSON format, or of a VPG. Journal history, for example, let's say I want to change the journal history of all my VPGs to 8 hours. I can actually just say journal history in hours, :4, or change it to 8, or whatever I want to do. And what I basically do with the VPG settings, management settings API, I just push that JSON to the API, and the API can read it and then change the settings it needs to change. Now, if we put that in practice, we have several use cases, of course, for VPG Management API. One of them is automated VM protection. There's a beautiful example we have available of where we use specific folders in vCenter to actually say, okay, all my new VMs go into this folder, and as soon as we see them, we'll actually automatically protect them in Zerto. There's a whole blog article written about that, where we can definitely link you to. But we can also mass change all the REIP settings. let's say I'm changing my IP settings as soon as I do a failover to our disaster recovery site. I'm moving from a 192.168.2 subnet to a 192.168.3 subnet. But actually, I'm changing providers. I've moved my network to a 172.16.0.0 type of network. But because I've pre-populated all these settings in my NIC settings, I don't want to change them manually. I actually want to mass change them all by using the API. So what I'm going to do right now is actually walk through how we do that with using the API. Simple two-step process that we actually use for this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to export all of the network settings into a CSV file. This allows you to really easily edit all the details you need to edit. Excel has great find and replace type of functionality in there. The only thing we need to do is open that CSV file, change everything we want to change in one simple find and replace type of way, and then use that same CSV file to actually do the next step. Next step is we're going to authenticate to the API again. Step 2, we're going to read all the settings from that CSV file where we've edited all the IP settings that we wanted to change, and then change the VNIC settings using the API. Now, with the API settings, we can change multiple settings at once. So if we have multiple network adapters, we need to first loop through all those network adapters, change the IP settings, and what we then do is actually commit those changes. And what the commit change does is actually update the VPG with all the new information. So we can do multiple edits in the same loop and then commit all those changes. So we'll only have one VPG update action on a Zerto level. Now, if we go through the CSV file, as you can see, there's a little bit more complex one. This is all the VMs that have different NICs in there and all of their VIP settings, whether it's failover test or failover settings. And this is where you can mass change them using Excel or using any favorite editor that you have. Now, the next step is we'll actually go and create the JSON that we need to change all those IP addresses. As I explained before, the VPG Management API uses JSON to push all the settings to our API and to process them in the backend. Now, this is where we create all these JSONs. That we do that in the script. We'll basically use variables that will enter into the JSON. As you can see, we have the gateway in here. Is it a DHCP type of operation? Do you want to use DHCP, yes or no? What are the DNS servers? All the settings you can make using the UI is also something you can do using the VPG Management Setting API. And the only thing we're going to do after that is actually for every VM NIC that we have in our JSON file, we're going to push those the JSON content to the API. Of course, using all the right identifier settings. Once all that is done, we'll commit those settings. Using that identifier that we've created as a first step, we'll then say commit all these settings, making sure that they're updated in Zerto, and you can use them straight afterwards. So this is a more complex script, but what it actually does, it saves you a lot of time. If you need to change about 100 IP addresses, it's way easier to do this in a script, way faster, and a lot more foolproof as well. Besides the VPG Management API, we also have a VPG API. This might be a little bit confusing, but the VPG API is more of a operational or operation type of API. So it allows you to get all the information of the API, of the VPGs, all the checkpoints that are available, the status, current RPO, and things like that. But it also allows you to do VPG operations like failover testing, pause, resume, and start the cloning operation as well. And of course, it allows you to delete a VPG in total as well. Now, a couple of the use cases using the VPG API is create a recovery plan, and this is something I will dig into. But you can also create customized reporting. Let's say you want to report on the RPO over the last month. We actually allow you to pull all the information from the API, store it in a CSV file, do that every 5 minutes, and then have an historical report build out of that CSV information. But also a use case would be automated failover testing. These are only 3 of the use cases. We actually have more. We've got a customer running this automated as well, but instead of doing a failover test, what they do with the failed over or the test machines that are running on their platform, this is a cloud service provider, they actually do security scans on top of that on a regular basis, and based on the outputs, they can actually even find a checkpoint that does not contain the security issues they found in this current checkpoint, and email this in a report to a customer. This is a really, really nice use case, and besides being really cool technically, it also adds another service to the service provider that they can then go ahead and let their customers use. Now, digging into the recovery plan, like I said, workflows are really important. This one is a little bit more to it because we added more steps into this script. Now, this is also some script that you can find online as well. Actually, it's being blogged about the script, and that's where you can download it as well. Of course, you will see my email address in the beginning of this presentation. My email address will be at the end of this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions and or provide you with scripts we've shown you here right now. Now, how do I start with the recovery plan? First thing I need to do, authentication. First step of every script that we'll build, first step of every automation action we'll do. What we'll do is actually, again, use a CSV file. As you can see, we love our CSV files, but basically what we've done in that CSV file, we built the recovery plan, the order of the VPGs, then how they need to boot, and all these kind of things. So we'll read that recovery plan from the CSV. Then the first question, as any product that runs on Windows needs to do is, are you really sure you want to do this? No, okay, we'll stop the whole process. Yes, we're going to start the failover or failover test. So you have the option to use a failover or to test, to use a failover test during this. Now, the next question will ask you, after we've started the first VPG, did this VPG start successfully? If not, then we'll stop the failover test. If it's yes, then we'll just loop through all the VPGs we have defined in our recovery plan until the last one is done. Then we've basically built a recovery plan and everything is started in the order we wanted it to with the wait time we wanted it to have. Now, if we take a look at the CSV file, again, we love these CSV files. This basically shows you 2 VPGs that will fail over 30 seconds after each other. We'll have pre-failover user prompts if needed. We even have scripts defined in the recovery plan. We allow you to set the commit policy. Do you want to do auto commit? Do you want to do a none? You can all define that in the script, and even a shutdown policy is something we can use. Now, what we do code-wise, again, PowerShell. I love PowerShell, and because it's really easy, and we have loads of examples in that. Basically, what we do is we push for every VPG we find in recovery plan, we'll actually send the failover command to that with the settings defined in that recovery plan. It's basically as simple as that. We'll build a JSON that has all the settings in there. Which checkpoint do I want to use? With commit policy, shutdown policy, you name it, and we'll just send that over to the failover command using the API. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to actually go into how do I build my first script in PowerShell. But I think, especially with the white paper we've built, the API white paper, there are loads of examples in there, and we also explain the whole authentication process and how to use JSON and all these kind of things in our scripts. As you've seen, there's a lot of use cases that we can use using Zerto and our RESTful API. Most of this is around automation, these kind of use cases, but please be creative and use our API as much as possible. I think it can definitely make your life better and especially easier. We've seen VRA deploy and upgrade, automatic VM protection, custom reporting, all using the APIs I actually discussed in this session. Mass change your EIP settings or create your own recovery plan. And actually, like I said, I wanted to keep enough time open for questions at the end of this session. So what I'm going to do right now is going to start opening up the question panel on my own screen and try and see if there's any questions I can answer. So let me open up the screen. Are there any plans to release resources for PowerShell DSC? We'd like to have descriptive rather than imperative on interacting with the API, and DSC would be perfect for that. I would definitely need to check that with our product management team. I think it would definitely make sense. So it's definitely something I will be looking at and definitely be asking them. If you be able to send me your details after this session, I can definitely get back to you on that. The question, how does this product has more advantage than VMware SRM? I think there's a couple of things. I don't think we even have time to go through all of them. One of the things is this is completely technology agnostic, meaning that we can run between different storage vendors, different VMware versions, between VMware and Hyper-V, Hyper-V and the cloud, public cloud, managed service providers. There's a lot more freedom you get. Besides that, we're not just an orchestration engine. SRM, of course, is the only thing it does is orchestrate the failover. It's still really depending on different types of third-party replication. We have our own replication, really efficient replication, built into the product. So that allows for a lot more visibility and recovery options. A question from Michael Cooper about browsing the API. How do we know what objects/properties are required for any given request? That's all, should all be in the reference guides. Exactly what is required, what is optional. Once you are using that specific API call. Still waiting for other questions. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Now we've got the time. Any other questions? Happy to answer them as well, regarding Zerto, of course. Can we use the APIs to cloud? Right now, the APIs are limited to on-premise workloads. Of course, on the roadmap, we are going to be developing the APIs for all of the VPG settings in the cloud as well. Another thing that might be noted, we changed the way we respond in 5.0 update 3. Now we're in the process of rebuilding all the scripts and updating documentation in the white paper, but there are a few changes needed to the top level objects once you retrieve information from the API. So if you have any questions or run into an issue about that, please contact either our support department or open up a question on the forums on my Zerto. We'll definitely have an answer on how to solve that. Of course, we'll try to update the scripts as soon as possible. I see that there is some other questions. Well, does Zerto support answer general Q&A regarding API, or is there a contact within your company? So anything, so the way you consume the API, if you find an issue with that, you can definitely open up a support ticket. The scripts itself are best effort. You can definitely contact me. Of course, I'm not always available, but there are different resources. You can always contact your local SC as well. They might be able to help you with any type of troubleshooting as well. For anything specific, you could just contact your local account management team as well. we'll definitely continue to support any of our PowerShell commandlets. The other question I'm getting, is there a way to create a VPG and save it for later reconfiguration using the API? Not 100% sure what you mean by that, but you can definitely or save the JSON that you use to push towards the API and use that. Can you show us a real demo of that authentication using the REST API? Unfortunately, I don't have the resources available at this time. Definitely contact me if you want more details around that. Happy to show you anything I can. Unfortunately, I can't do it right now. Let me see. Any more questions? I'll get back to Geraldo. Geraldo's asking if he can change the default password. I'll get back to you on that. I'll give it a couple of more minutes. If we don't get any questions, I'm going to thank everyone for their attendance and for listening to this session. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or your SC if you have more questions about this. I think there's a lot more we can do with our API. There's a lot more attention we're going to give it. There's a lot more examples that we're going to bring out later on. I think it's a really interesting one, especially as I see that more and more people are starting to use automation. They're starting to use orchestration as well. With our APIs, it is really powerful, especially combined with like the PowerShell CLI and APIs you can use with VMware and all vCloud Direct or Hyper-V or general Windows. So it's really powerful, and I think as things like automation and RPA are getting more and more attention, are getting more and more implemented into organizations, we'll start to see a more heavily use of APIs as well. Let's see any more questions. If not, I'm gonna thank everyone again and give you back a couple of more minutes of your day to start using and consuming those APIs.